He was my backup plan, my girlfriend said at a wedding, laughing like I was still waiting somewhere for her to come back. I didn't react. I just set my glass down and looked at the woman standing beside her. Her own mother cut her off. Before I said a word, and the question she asked made the whole table go silent. My name is Alex. I'm 29, and I work as a software developer at a mid-sized company, been there 4 years. At the time this happened, I'd been with Sarah for 3.5 years. She's 27, a freelance graphic artist. Genuinely talented. I mean that without any bitterness attached. Her work had real direction to it, the kind that had somewhere to go if the timing worked out. We moved in together about 1.5 years into the relationship. Practically speaking, I covered rent, utilities, and groceries. She contributed when she had a good month, which was some months and not others. I want to be honest about this. I was never keeping score. I believed in what she was building, and I liked being the person who made space for her to do it. That felt like a choice I was making, not a sacrifice I was absorbing. Everything was mostly fine until about 8 months before that night. That's when Jake entered the picture. She introduced him as her best guy friend from art school. A completely normal introduction. I don't have rules about who my partner can spend time with. But I started noticing things, slowly. Fewer evenings at home together. More nights out I wasn't part of. Instagram stories from bars and venues with Jake's name tagged at 11 at night, followed by a text to me at 11:08 that just said goodnight. I noticed. I didn't say anything for months. I told myself I was being reasonable about it. Eventually, I brought it up once. No drama, no accusations. I just said I'd been feeling a little disconnected lately and wished we had more time together. She looked at me like I'd said something that embarrassed her. I can't believe you're being this insecure about a friendship. I apologized. I dropped it. I told myself she was probably right. But looking back, that was the moment I stopped trusting my own read of the situation. She hadn't convinced me she was right. She just made me feel too stupid to keep saying I might not be. And I didn't want to be the kind of boyfriend who turned every uneasy feeling into a problem. So I let it go. And then let it go again. And again for months. Until one night I didn't. The thing about that night is that it didn't feel like a sudden explosion. It felt more like the last page of a long book you've been reading slowly and telling yourself might end differently. Jake was taking her to a new club downtown. She'd mentioned it a few times over the past couple of weeks, always with his name attached. What Jake had heard about the crowd, what time Jake wanted to get there, what Jake thought of the lineup. I'd filed it away as background noise. I walked into the living room, and she was fully ready to go. Heels on, second earring in, bag on the chair, jacket in her hand. I asked if I could come. Not sarcastically. Not as a test. I genuinely asked if I could come along, just once. That was the whole request. You'd hate it, she said. She was checking herself in the mirror. You'd stand in the corner all night and check your phone and make me feel guilty for wanting to be somewhere. I kept my voice level. I just want to be included sometimes. She put the earring down, turned around. For 1 second, I actually thought she was going to hear me. If you don't like how I live my life, leave. She said it like a simple sentence, like it was just information she was sharing. Then she picked up her jacket, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked past me. The door closed behind her, no slam, just a door, on a regular night. I sat on the couch for about 20 minutes after that. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry in a way that made any noise. I was sitting in the specific kind of quiet that comes when something that's been suspended for a long time finally settles. Then I got up. I went to the junk drawer. She kept a sticky notepad in there. She'd bought it because she liked writing grocery lists by hand. I took one sheet. I wrote one sentence. You're right. I don't like it. So I left. I set it next to her keys on the kitchen counter, picked up my overnight bag and my laptop bag, closed the front door quietly behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't have a reason to. My friend Danny let me crash without asking too many questions, which I appreciated. I wasn't ready to explain it cleanly yet. I sat on his couch with a beer I barely touched and let my brain run the reel backward. The creative retreat she'd gone on 3 months earlier. She'd mentioned it almost in passing one Sunday afternoon. I'm going to be away this weekend. There's a thing. She said it the way you mentioned something minor. I'd found photos from it on Instagram later, not looking for anything, just scrolling. Jake was in 2 of them. I hadn't said anything. The birthday dinner. My birthday. She'd made the reservation, picked the restaurant, which I'd taken as a good sign. We were there for 2 hours. For at least 40 minutes of that, She was on her phone, not scrolling, typing, the quick back and forth kind. I refilled my own water glass twice. I told myself she was handling something for a client. I didn't ask. I hadn't said anything. And then there was the comment. Maybe 6 weeks before that night. I'd come in from the hallway and she was on the phone with a friend and she didn't know I was there yet. I heard her say, "He's steady, you know. He's just not exciting. I love him." But she said I love him like it was the qualifying clause. Like it was the thing she had to acknowledge before she got to the actual point. I walked back to the other room before she saw me. I never said anything about that either. Sitting at Danny's, I wasn't angry at past me for letting those things go. I understood why I had. Every time something felt off, she reframed it, made the feeling the problem instead of what caused it. And I kept agreeing that the feeling was the problem because it was easier than the alternative. Because saying I was right would have meant looking at something I wasn't ready to look at. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from Sarah. "Are you seriously doing this over one night out? This is so dramatic, Alex. Come home." I read it once. Set the phone face down. Didn't reply. She'd been out with Jake until past 2 in the morning. She came home to an empty apartment and a sticky note. And her first response was not a call, not a question, not even "Are you okay?" It was a text telling me I was overreacting. Telling me to come home like it was a minor inconvenience she needed to resolve before bed. She still thought I was going to come back. That was the thing I needed to understand, finally. It wasn't one night. It had never been just one night. Within a few days, there was a version of events circulating that I wasn't in. I started hearing pieces of it secondhand. The story was, Alex couldn't handle Sarah having male friendships. He'd always been a little controlling about it. She just hadn't talked about it. He walked out without giving her any real chance to explain or have an actual conversation. I heard variations on that from 3 different people across 1 week. On Tuesday morning, she posted an Instagram caption. I saw it because we hadn't unfollowed each other yet. Sometimes the people who claim to support you are the ones holding you back most. No names, just enough for anyone who knew us to do the math. 2 days later, a repost. Secure men don't monitor who you spend time with. She posted that at 9 on a Thursday morning. Not at midnight when you're emotional and running on pain. 9 in the morning, after coffee, with full deliberateness. That's not a grief post. That's a press release. Her sister texted me and asked if I'd be willing to give Sarah a chance to explain. She said Sarah was really struggling. Then Karen called. Karen, Sarah's mother, and I had always had a decent relationship. She was direct, and I'd always respected that about her. She says you just walked out, Karen said. Without even trying to talk, is that what happened? I thought about what Sarah had posted that morning. I thought about the text at 2 in the morning telling me I was being dramatic. I thought about 11 months of being called insecure for noticing things I'd actually been right about. There's more to the story than that, I said carefully. There was a pause on the line. A real one. I see, Karen said. She didn't ask me to elaborate. She didn't push back. She just said she saw. And something in how she said it told me she wasn't entirely surprised. Take care of yourself, she said, and that was the end of the call. I didn't post anything. I didn't respond to Sarah's friends. I had no interest in running a counter-narrative. I had nothing to perform. My friend Mike, who'd known me for 6 years, told a few people quietly, "That's not the Alex I know." I knew the silence made me look guilty by default. I knew the longer I said nothing, the more her version filled the space. I chose it anyway. The truth was going to have to do the work on its own timeline, without my help. About a month after I left, Mike was working through the final details for his wedding. He and his fiancée had been planning for almost a year. The last few weeks before the date were mostly administrative, confirming RSVPs, finalizing the seating chart, tying up loose ends on the guest list. The kind of work that takes a full Saturday afternoon. At some point, he was on Jake's Instagram, trying to remember something logistical. Jake had come to one group dinner about 6 months earlier. Sarah had brought him, and Mike was trying to remember if Jake had actually met his fiancée during that dinner, because it affected how he'd need to word something on the seating arrangement. Simple stuff. Wedding admin. He found it. Jake's profile, most recent post. A photo at a rooftop bar. Jake and a woman no one in our circle had ever met. Both of them clearly comfortable. The caption, "Finally found my person," posted 9 days after I left. Mike sent me a screenshot with one line. "Bro, I don't want to be in the middle of this, but..." I looked at that post for a long time. 9 days. Jake had found his person 9 days after the situation between me and Sarah became known, which meant he had been moving towards someone else, or already there, while he was still the reason Sarah was giving me ultimatums in my own living room. While she was telling me I was insecure for having feelings about where she was spending her evenings. I did the math on the timeline quietly. I didn't share it with anyone. A few days later, I listened to Sarah's voicemails. All 12 of them, in order, sitting alone in my new apartment on a Sunday evening. The first few were sharp. Why aren't you picking up? Can you at least let me know you're okay? Still the voice of someone who expected a response and planned to deal with it on her terms once she got one. By the fourth, something had shifted. He said he needs space. I thought. She stopped mid-sentence. Didn't finish it. The call just ended there. By the sixth, please just call me back. By the ninth, nothing specific. Just her voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it, and then the line going dead. I didn't call back. I sat there and let what I was hearing settle into a shape I could actually look at. She hadn't been calling me because she'd reached some realization about us. She was calling because the plan hadn't worked. Jake had pulled back, and I, the stable one, the one who was always there, the one she'd called dramatic for asking to be included, was the number she still had. Not because she'd chosen me, because she'd assumed I'd still be available to be chosen. I understood something then that I couldn't have put into words a month earlier. She didn't want me back because she missed me. She wanted me back because her fallback position was no longer holding, and she'd built me into that position without my knowledge or consent. There was one more thing I needed to do. And then I was finished. I blocked her number. Not in anger, there was no anger left by that point, but because 12 voicemails across 2 weeks was enough. I didn't need more information. I knew what I knew. I called the leasing office. My name was the primary on the lease, which made things cleaner than they might have been. I notified Sarah that she had 2 weeks to collect her things. I wasn't there when she did. There was nothing I needed to supervise. I ended the shared streaming accounts on a Wednesday evening, changed the passwords, sent the cancellation confirmations, closed the laptop, went to bed. No announcement. No explanation. Just the quiet administrative work of unwinding a shared life. I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom in a different part of the city. Quieter neighborhood. Longer commute, but I liked the walk. And then I went back to the work project I'd been deprioritizing for months. I want to be honest about why I'd been putting it off. It wasn't the difficulty of the work. It was the energy. For a long time, I'd come home every evening and spend whatever remained of my focus on managing the emotional climate of the apartment, being attentive enough, reading the room correctly, navigating whatever the current tension was without making it worse. By the time I got to my own desk after dinner, I had almost nothing left for anything that was actually mine. That problem was gone. I worked late most nights that first month. Sometimes until 11, sometimes past it. I didn't resent it. The work was hard in the clean way that hard things are when there's no competing drain on your attention. About 3 months in, my company held a tech event. A meetup, panel discussion, catered dinner. I went mostly out of habit and stayed mostly out of inertia. At dinner, the woman sitting next to me, Emily, asked what I was building. Not what my job title was. Not what company I worked for. What I was building, specifically. I answered her. And I kept answering. And she kept following along, not just waiting for me to finish, but actually tracking the details. Somewhere in the middle of what became a 10-minute conversation, I noticed I hadn't thought about Sarah once. Emily had ordered the wrong entree. She looked at my plate, looked at hers, and without making it a thing, just swapped them. I noticed that immediately. Mike's wedding was 8 months after the night I left. I went with Emily. It was the first time I was bringing someone to an event where people had known me during the Sarah years, and I'd thought about that more than I probably needed to what it would look like, whether it was too soon, whether anyone would read into it something that wasn't yet there. By the time we were actually at the venue, none of that felt like it mattered. It just felt easy. Unexpectedly easy. Sarah was not on the guest list. She'd known Mike only through me, and when that connection ended, so did her relationship to his world. But apparently she'd known the wedding was happening, that information lived in enough corners of our mutual friend group that it would have been hard to avoid. And apparently she'd decided that not being invited was a solvable problem. I found out afterward that she'd tried to RSVP directly through the venue and been told the list was closed. So she came anyway. I didn't see her come in. Emily did. Emily put her hand lightly on my forearm. No drama, just a small contact that meant pay attention, and I looked up. Across the room, near the entrance, Sarah was standing and scanning the tables, She was dressed intentionally. She'd come prepared for a specific outcome. Mike saw her from the head table. I watched his expression shift. She crossed the room, stopped at our table. Her eyes moved to Emily for exactly 1 second, a quick inventory, then settled on me. "We need to talk," she said. "You never gave me a real chance to explain." I looked at her. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was sitting at a wedding with someone I liked, and this person from a previous chapter of my life had walked in uninvited and expected me to receive that as an opening rather than a closing. "I gave you 3.5 years, I said. "Jake didn't mean anything. I made a mistake. I see that now. I didn't think you'd actually." Sarah. Just her name. Once. That was all I had. From 2 tables over, a chair scraped back. Karen stood up. Sarah's mother. She was on the guest list independently. Her family had known Mike's family for years through a connection that predated me and had nothing to do with me. She'd already been here before Sarah arrived. From across the room, she'd almost certainly seen her daughter come in. She stood up and said, clearly and without raising her voice, "Sarah, you need to stop." Sarah turned. The surprise on her face was real. She'd either forgotten her mother would be here, or she'd calculated that Karen would stay quiet. "Mom, you don't understand. I just need 5 minutes with him. I understand more than you think. Go." Mike's best man, Tom, was already moving toward our table. He put a hand on Sarah's shoulder, gentle, no scene, and told her he was going to have to ask her to step outside. She looked back at me one more time. I had already turned to Emily. "Do you want to get some air after the speeches?" I asked. Tom walked Sarah toward the exit. She looked back once more as they reached the door. I don't know what she was hoping to see. I wasn't looking. She said it when she was almost out of the room. I think she meant it as a last attempt, something to make me react, to get me out of my seat and into a conversation she could take control of. I don't think she thought about who else was standing close enough to hear. I don't understand this. He was my backup plan. I thought he'd always be there. The tables nearest to her went quiet. Karen sat back down. Slowly. She looked at her hands, placed flat on the table in front of her. Not at me. Not at where Sarah had been. Just at her hands. I heard it. Every word. I didn't turn around. There was nothing to say and no reason to say it. I poured Emily's water. She'd been waiting on a refill and asked again if she wanted to step outside after the next speech. "Yeah," she said. "That sounds good." The phrase Sarah had used traveled through the room at the speed that certain statements travel when they answer a question a lot of people have been quietly sitting with. By the time Tom had her out the door, the tables that had heard it were already processing what it meant. The tables that hadn't would know before the evening was over. She'd come to tell her version of the story one more time, in front of the right people. She told it, all right. The phrase traveled through the friend group within the week. Not as gossip, exactly. More like a piece of information that finally made something click. The narrative Sarah had been running for 8 months. Alex was controlling. Alex couldn't handle her having friendships. Alex left without communicating, required people to hold a version of me that a lot of them had never quite been able to reconcile with the person they'd actually known for years. They'd been trying to make both things true at once and finding it difficult. Backup plan didn't require any commentary. She'd said it herself, in front of witnesses, in the middle of trying to get me back. That's the kind of statement that does its own work. Sarah's sister called me on a Tuesday afternoon, about 5 days after the wedding. I almost didn't pick up. I did. She said she owed me an apology, that she'd been pushing for Sarah to get a chance to explain without knowing what had actually been going on, and that what she'd heard Sarah say at the wedding had changed her understanding of the situation. She said she was sorry for the pressure she'd put on me. I told her I appreciated it. I meant that. 3 days after the wedding, Karen sent me a text. 4 words. "I'm sorry. Take care." I didn't hear from Sarah again. And the story she'd constructed, the careful, public one where she was finally living authentically and I was the limitation she'd outgrown, had nowhere left to stand. The one person whose insecurity and control it depended on had just been described, by her, as a safety net she'd been planning to fall back into. You can't rebuild a narrative about someone's jealousy and unreasonableness after you've said, out loud, in a room, that you'd counted on them to always be there if things didn't work out. Jake got engaged the following year. I saw it on Instagram the same way I'd learned most things in that period incidentally, without it meaning much. I shipped the work project in February. It went better than I'd projected. That spring, Emily and I spent a weekend at a small town on the coast, the kind of place that's a little too far to be convenient, and a little too quiet to be interesting, which is exactly why neither of us had trouble agreeing to go. We found a restaurant that was too loud and both ordered the wrong thing and ended up swapping plates without discussing it. It was the second time she'd done that. I didn't say anything about it. I just noticed. I wrote this on a Thursday evening, sitting in my apartment, in the quiet that used to feel like absence and now just feels like mine. Someone in another thread asked how you know when you're really over something. I think you know when telling the story stops being about them. When you can go all the way to the end and the last image isn't where they are, it's where you are. She said, "If you don't like it, leave." So I did.